The Carter family had always dreamed of a fresh start. When they found the sprawling Victorian mansion on Hollow Hill, nestled deep in the woods just outside a sleepy New England town, it seemed like fate. The house was grand, with towering gables, stained glass windows, and a sprawling garden. It was a steal for the price, though the realtor had been oddly evasive about its history. But the Carters, Mark, Sarah, and their 2 children, Emily and Jake, were too enchanted to care. They moved in with their 2 golden retrievers, Max and Bella, who bounded through the halls, tails wagging, as if they'd found their own slice of paradise. But the joy was short-lived. The first sign that something was wrong came a week after they moved in. It was midnight, and the house was eerily quiet. Sarah woke to the sound of whimpering. At first, she thought it was one of the kids, but as she crept down the hallway, she realized it was coming from the living room. Max and Bella were huddled together in the corner, their eyes fixed on the far wall. They were trembling, their tails tucked between their legs. Sarah called to them, but they didn't move. Instead, they began to howl, a low, mournful sound that sent chills down her spine. She flicked on the light, but the room was empty. The dogs bolted upstairs, nearly knocking her over in their panic. The next morning, the dogs seemed fine, but the incident left Sarah unsettled. Mark dismissed it, saying they were probably just adjusting to the new environment. But the strange behavior didn't stop. Night after night, the dogs would cry, their eyes locked on the same spot in the living room. They began to avoid that area altogether, skittering past it with their ears flattened. Then, one evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Max and Bella suddenly lunged at each other, snarling and snapping like rabid animals. Mark had to pry them apart, his hands bleeding from the bites. The dogs, who had been inseparable since they were puppies, now acted like mortal enemies. The children were the next to notice something was off. Emily, the older of the 2, began complaining about hearing whispers in her room at night. Jake, who was only 7, refused to sleep alone, insisting that he saw shadows moving in the corners of his room. Sarah tried to reassure them, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching them. One night, as she tucked Jake into bed, he pointed to the closet and whispered, "Mommy, who's that man?" Sarah froze. The closet door was slightly ajar, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of movement. She grabbed Jake and carried him to her room, her heart pounding. Mark searched the closet but found nothing. Still, the image of Jake's terrified face haunted her. The incidents grew more frequent and more sinister. Dishes would shatter in the kitchen when no one was there. The temperature in certain rooms would drop suddenly, leaving their breath visible in the air. Emily's toys began moving on their own, and once, Sarah found her daughter's doll sitting upright on the stairs, its head turned at an unnatural angle. The dogs, now permanently on edge, would bark at empty corners, their hackles raised. One afternoon, Sarah walked into the living room to find Max and Bella staring at the ceiling, growling. She followed their gaze and saw nothing, but the chandelier above her began to sway violently, as if pushed by an unseen hand. The breaking point came one stormy night. The power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Mark lit candles, and the family huddled together in the living room. The dogs were frantic, pacing and whining. Suddenly the candles flickered and went out, one by one. In the pitch black, they heard it, a low, guttural growl that didn't come from the dogs. Emily screamed as something cold brushed past her. Jake began to cry, and Sarah grabbed him, her own voice trembling as she called for Mark. The growl grew louder, echoing through the room, and then, from the darkness, came a voice, a raspy, inhuman whisper. "Leave." The power came back on, and the family stared at each other, pale and shaken. The dogs were gone. They found them in the basement, cowering in a corner, their fur matted with sweat. Max had a deep gash on his side, as if clawed by something with long, sharp nails. The next morning, the Carters packed their bags and fled the house, leaving most of their belongings behind. As they drove away, Sarah glanced back at the mansion. In the upstairs window, she saw a figure, a man with hollow eyes and a twisted smile, watching them go. She blinked, and he was gone. They never returned to Hollow Hill. The house remained empty, its dark secrets buried within its walls. But sometimes, on quiet nights, the townsfolk would hear the distant howl of dogs, echoing from the woods, a mournful sound that sent shivers down their spines. And those brave enough to venture near the mansion swore they could see shadows moving behind the stained glass windows and hear the faint, chilling whisper, "Come back." The Carters never spoke of what happened in that house, but they kept the dogs close, grateful for the warning that had saved their lives. Max and Bella never fully recovered, though. They would often wake in the night, their eyes fixed on some unseen horror, and let out a low, mournful cry, a reminder that some doors once opened should never be closed again.